Welcome, everyone. So excited to see all of your faces here tonight. No, I turned it off because I want this to have.
Can we turn it on?
I can turn the light off while we watch this.
Okay.
That's what I was going to do. Can you see the intro? Well, I was going to turn one
Yeah,
light
they
off. Is that okay?
They're very dead ambient anyway.
No, I was turning that one off. Is that
Yeah,
good?
that one's good.
That's nice.
That's good enough.
Yes.
And then we'll turn it back on when we, well, we might leave it out.
No, this is a good ambience in here.
It's all about the ambiance. Can you see us, Heidi?
I just zoomed in, but
That's okay then, all right.
But
So
yes,
we're
if I
gonna
zoom
start
out.
with an invocation song that we're going to play for you to set the mood. Get us in the mood. Oops. That is your. Let's try that. Sorry about that. By the bones, by the soil, that is your home. By the 13 bells of midnight's ring, by the banshee's voice that wails and sings, by the blood that remembers and the bones that tell, the hands that reach from the fairy well, by the voice that calls from beyond the mold, by the voices that knew and the memory of old. I call the ancestral shades of the dead by the haunting hand and the speaking head. With ink and paper and voice of wind, I call to you, my blessed kin. Ancestral shades and sealy folk, come on a path of fire and smoke. Hearken and have this work tonight. Take what's wrong and set things right. By the secrets of the grave and the glory of the moon, grant to me a magic boon. My witch's spell and witch's trance, join me in this magic dance. For when we dance and fly no more, all will be as it was before. Now the door swings open wide. Come rush to me, oh, Nettie's tide. I write your name in the wings of the wind. Come to me, my blessed kin. Come to me, my blessed kin. Come to me, my blessed kin. So tonight, on the cusp of Samhain, we are going to embark on a journey to Albion, to the ancient pagan Celtic Holy Land. And this talk was birthed, well, who knows when it was actually birthed. But the call for this talk took place on the morning that we returned from pilgrimage, and we've been tasked with the
missive of how are you going to take this pilgrimage back? How are you going to take it back to your community? How are you going to take this numinous experience that you've had and seed it out into the world? And I woke up that morning and heard, clear as a bell, do what you do best. Combine it with your scholarship, an Indigo scholarship, and give it to your community so that you'll receive not just the information, but the feeling tone, the emotional resonance, the embodiment of this experience, which we carry in our bones and can transmit to you. So the title of our talk is Rewilding the Pagan Soul, Albion, Ecopsychology, and the Epigenetic Memory of Place. I'm Megan Rose Willever, and I'm a PhD candidate here at CIIS. I'm a pagan minister and a pagan scholar. My passions is really bringing religious paganism into a broader relationship and conversation with religious studies in general. My background is from the Graduate Theological Union. I did my master's in seminary there. And so I bring a very specific eye for religious studies and integration and integral scholarship. And this is?
I'm Ryan Indigo Warman. We are both in the East-West Psychology Department here. I'm also a PhD candidate. And I actually did an independent major in ecopsychology at UC Santa Cruz, and then came here and did my master's in the philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness department. So it's all going to be weaved into our talk tonight.
So I thought we'd start by a little bit of singing. This was one of the songs that we started out our pilgrimage with. Everywhere we went, we sang and made noise. And sound and just vocalized, but also movement. So there was a lot of ways that we could sort of get our body kind of limbered up for holding the energies. So those of us, there are a few of us here that were actually on pilgrimage, not just Indigo and myself. Jonathan and Dionisio were all both on pilgrimage. So we're going to sing this song for you the first time, and we invite you to join in. We'll sing it 3 times in total. And join in or listen as you feel called. Earth Mother, we honor your body, Earth Mother. We honor your bones, Earth Mother. We enter your body, Earth Mother. We sing to your stones, awake, awake, awaken. Awake, awake, awaken. Earth Mother, we honor your body, Earth Mother. We honor your bones, Earth Mother. We enter your body, Earth Mother. We sing to your stones, awake, awake, awaken. Awake, awake, awaken. Earth Mother, we honor your body, Earth Mother. We honor your bones, Earth Mother. We enter your body, Earth Mother. We sing to your stones, awake, awake, awaken. Awake, awake, awaken. So that song was taught to us by Rose Biriaha, the Red Witch of Wales, who took us on pilgrimage. She was our first guide. You can see her with a hat. Yeah, her little straw hat. The object of pilgrimage is not to rest and recreation, to get away from it all. To set out on pilgrimage is to throw down a challenge to everyday life, Nothing matters now but this adventure. There is a stony road to climb on foot, a rough, wild path in a landscape where everything is new. The naked glitter of the sacred mountains stirs the imagination. The adventure of self-conquest has begun. Specifics may differ, but the substance is always the same. Travel brings a special kind of wisdom if one is open to it. So as Westerners, we've inherited a post-Christian landscape, which means we've lost many of our ancient pagan lineages, allegedly. But we've not lost the ancient art of pilgrimage to holy places, which changes, activates, and initiates us into the pagan mysteries. Whether we're going to Jerusalem as a Christian or a Jew, to Mecca as a Muslim, or to the Shakti Pitha as a Hindu. The Shakti Pitha being the sacred sites in India where the body of the goddess is believed to be living, breathing, and manifesting in the earth. We go to sacred sites to remember, to literally refashion and activate and quicken our memory, our holy memories, our sacred memories. And so on this pilgrimage that we took to Albion, the intention was to drop deep into the memory sphere, deep into the latent chthonic memory that is in rock, in water, in tree, and from that place to access the ancestors, the genus Loki, the beings that live in those fields, and from it to help quicken, to help remember. So I want to talk a little bit about our use of the term pagan, because there's a lot of pagan ideas and identities. We, in this talk, are defining pagan as a nature-centered, polytheistic beliefs and practices that equally honor the divine feminine, divine masculine, and the divine androgyne. Sometimes called Celtic shamanism, it can include various neo-pagan religious groups like Wicca, witchcraft, druidry, fairy seership, and Norse heathenry. Although, specifically to Norse heathenry, they may look actually to Scandinavia, Iceland, or the Germanic regions for their spiritual pilgrimage sites. So for this lecture, we're focusing primarily on the pagan spiritual identity associated with the ancient Neolithic and megalithic sites in England, Wales, and Cornwall.
And I'd like to say that I have a special connection to Ireland as well. There are just as many megalithic sites there, including a massive complex called Newgrange, which is the size of Stonehenge. We visited a number of these sites in 2012 and gave a talk here that focused more on the sustainable communities that we visited. But because we didn't visit Ireland on this trip, we're going to focus specifically on the sites that we did visit.
So I want to offer that the practice of paganism is not really an academic or exercise or about finding historical accuracy. Paganism is a living, breathing tradition that evolves and changes like any other religion. And really to try and look for a kind of unbroken lineage or apostolic succession is a little bit of a misnomer, especially when you're looking at polytheistic religions and paganism, because there's many different people and many different lineages, and some are newer than others. And the varying beliefs in paganism are as different as Catholicism is to Southern Baptist as to Mormonism. So instead of looking for some cohesive, this is where paganism or Celtic paganism came from, I think it's more important to understand that what we're dealing with now is a world that is finally, in the past 60 years, open again for people to practice paganism openly. So up until 1951, the practice of witchcraft, druidry, heathenry, all these different things was illegal. particularly in the Celtic Isles. The witchcraft laws were not repealed until 1951, and so up until that time, anything that was done covertly. It was done either in hermetic secret societies, or it was done in underground covens where you only spoke to the people that you knew, that knew you, about what your practices and beliefs were. When paganism became to be popularized again was when Gerald Gardner brought his background in shamanism and ceremonial magic and the hedge witchery of the UK, which had been around since the 1600s. And he sort of brought it together and created a new flavor of witchcraft called Wicca. And that's the best and most widest known version of paganism right now. In fact, Wicca is one of the fastest growing religions in the United States alone. So what we can do as modern pagans is reconnect, remember. A lot of our lineages were destroyed during the witch trials, our books, I should say, a lot of our grimoires and the documented records. But I would offer that all is not lost, that increasingly since the 1950s, more and more groups are coming out and showing their lineages that date back hundreds, if not thousands of years. And that, part of our work now as modern pagans is a kind of cultural resurrection. We're taking the chthonic ground, the underworld ground of tacit knowledge, which is knowledge that is expressed in silence, mystery, and primordial understandings. And we are remembering through connecting to our ancestors, through our bodies, through our intuition, and through dialogue with the land. We're literally bringing back into cultural awareness and practice paganism. So comparative mythologist and pagan priestess Kathy Jones suggests that there are 4 ways for us to discover our primal ancestors, our pagan ancestors. We do it through archaeology and studying archaeological evidence. We do it through myth, studying myths. We do it through connecting to our spirit selves or our past lives. And we do it through visiting sacred sites. So tonight we're primarily going to focus on the sacred sites piece. So I'll read you a piece from Kathy and then hand things over to Indigo here. Sacred sites are a way of discovering our primal British ancestors through inspiration and attunement in the ancient sacred places to the memory of the ancestors. Relatively little is known about the actual religious and spiritual beliefs of the ancient Britons, but there are long barrows, round mounds, circles of stone and earth, dolmens and standing stones in vast numbers. Some of these, such as Avebury and Avalon or Glastonbury, are presently being visited by thousands of people on pilgrimage in search of the experience of mystery. Others remain isolated and rarely visited. In the busy and quiet, we can attune to the ancestral energies lying dormant in these places. Here, the stones and sacred mounds hold the still reverberating echoes of the voices of our long-departed ancestors. If we listen, we may hear them. And just to add a scholarly little to that, this is key to any sort of heuristic research. Heuristic research, especially when you're working with the modalities or the methodologies of self-inquiry, intuitive inquiry, embodied inquiry, and organic inquiry, are all about tapping this primordial understanding, as Heidegger calls it, or the tacit knowledge as Polanyi and Moustakis refer to it. So it's this unknown mystery that is always there. We can only know what we know, and then we acknowledge that there's this vast amount of information that we don't know. So what are the ways in which, and pilgrimage we would offer is one of the ways in which that we tap this tacit knowledge.
All right, so a little bit more about what is Albion. So we are thinking of Albion as the Celtic pagan Holy Land, although that would also certainly include Ireland as well. Albion is the oldest name for the island of Great Britain that we know of, and we can attest to its use as early as the 6th to 4th century BCE from an early Roman Latin scholar, Arvenius, all the way through the 10th century AD. Athelstan, who's considered to be the first king of the Kingdom of England, also styled himself chief and ruler of all Albion. But as you can see in this map, there was no national identity. It was a very tribal identity. We're not even sure, going this far back into the late Iron Age, if they had a name for the entire island or a conception of the landmass itself. But if that name existed, it would certainly not have referred to a nation state. It would not even necessarily have referred to the landmass. It would have referred to the realm, to the spiritual gestalt of the land itself, almost like the name of the land as a living being. And that's certainly, we think, the way that William Blake intended it when he helped to resurrect the name Albion and the use of it during the Romantic period. There's another Celtic linguist, Xavier Delamare, who believed that Albion referred to the world above, the visible world, as opposed to the world below or the underworld. And he points to the Proto-Indo-European root alb for hill. Also, some other interesting things to note is that at least by the 1st century AD, Albion referred to the entire island of Great Britain, but later that was isolated to just what was called Caledonia, what is now Scotland. And indeed, the modern Gaelic name for the nation of Scotland is Alba. So it survives today. It was also briefly considered New Albion or Albion Nora, the Albion of the North, were briefly considered as alternate names for Canada during the Canadian Confederation. The name Britain actually comes from the Greeks, who referred to the entire islands, both Great Britain and Ireland, as Britannia, or the Brittonic Isles, which was later Latinized as Britannia, which we're all familiar with, I'm sure. And there are lots of legends about this time period of a race of giants that lived there, of lost and sunken lands, of Lyoness and Lys, or Ys, which could have referred to the Doggerland, the submerged, these are legends of sunken lands. It could refer to the Doggerland, which is the submerged land bridge that once connected Britain to mainland Europe, or it could refer to some other sunken island civilization that I won't mention.
That starts with an A and ends with an S. Okay.
Yeah, so everyone's heard of Stonehenge, but actually all stone circles are referred to as henges. They are found all over Europe. They're actually found all over the world. There's one with nearly identical astronomical alignments on the Naphtha Playa, which is east of the Nile River. It's some scholars believe it to be the actual source of the Egyptian civilization. So we have these henges all over the world with very similar astronomical alignments, usually to the rising sun on either the summer or winter solstice. What's more fascinating to me, which we really learned more about on this pilgrimage, is the fact that all of these sites align to each other as well. And what you can see here is just the westernmost tip of Cornwall. And one of the guides, Paulden Jenkins, that we toured with, has been conducting this geomantic, or what he calls psychographic research for decades. We have another map that I'll lay out during the break that shows similar alignments going through the Glastonbury tour, which we're going to talk about as sort of a axis mundi point. So it's just, it takes it to a whole new level when you consider that these massive structures align to each other and were built with such sophisticated stellar alignments and geographical alignments thousands upon thousands of years ago. I mean, we're looking at the megalithic period in Britain or Albion, 2500 to 1500 BCE approximately, but the total megalithic period for Europe goes from about 4000 BCE all the way up to about 1200 BCE. And yeah, it's really interesting to see the different progressions. Corsica, Sardinia, areas of Spain, even areas of Scandinavia. We find these megalithic monuments. And understanding how they connect to each other means that the entire landscape essentially was a sacred landscape that had meaning, it had spirit and vitality. It was used to track the passage of time and seasons. And as we also learned from Paulden, a great number of these henges, including Stonehenge, are built on top of massive underground water aquifers. So the theory is that the ancients believed that they were constructing these monuments to raise that energy of water up from the underworld and spread it out, distribute it across the land. And they would have located these water reservoirs through dowsing, which is another divinatory and intuitional technique. One of the circles that we visited and worked with had, was it 19 stones? It was a very odd number. I believe it was 19. And
Which
the one in Cornwall, the Mary Maids. 19 stones, and apparently that's rather common in a number of the stone henges. And what essentially happens is when you have a group of people that stand inside this and do a working with their backs to the stones, you're looking out between the other two stones. So you're not looking directly at the other person across from you, you're actually sending that energy out through the stones, spreading it out across the landscape, and you've got 19 people doing that in all 360 degrees. So these are the kinds of things that we learned about and recreated in certain sites, and it was a really magical trip, as we'll attempt to impart. So I kind of approach this stuff from a scholarly standpoint through the lens of ecopsychology, which I think shouldn't need much of an introduction at CIIS, but just for drill and for the record, it's the study of the human-nature relationship, which often takes place through wilderness therapy and education, as well as earth-based spirituality and ritual. The general zeitgeist of it being to heal the disconnection of the modern world, specifically our disconnection from nature and the natural world. And as such, some of the practices that are involved in ecopsychology are sustainability, homesteading, permaculture, organic agriculture, carbon footprint, really anything designed to lead a zero-waste life and a more connected life. So one of the issues with ecopsychology as it's developed over the last 30 or 40 years is that it can raise issues of cultural appropriation when Native American or indigenous beliefs are adopted by non-native peoples. There's a great documentary called White Shamans and Plastic Medicine Men, which I was shown in college. It's very triggering, but I see both sides of the debate. We need to reclaim these earth-based spiritual practices because that will affect how we structure our society and stop generating waste, move towards renewable energy, move away from fossil fuels once we remember the earth as our mother and as a living being. So this is sort of where it ties into the Gaia philosophy, but there's also very serious and legitimate concerns about appropriating indigenous beliefs and practices after centuries upon centuries of colonialization. So I believe that neo-paganism both offers and may arise from a desire to connect to the hereditary indigenous traditions of European descendants. And it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg argument, But what we do know for sure is that European paganism was first suppressed by the expansion of the Roman Empire and later by the European witch trials from the 15th to 18th century. And we could talk about that a little more in the Q&A section. We actually had a layover in Salem, Massachusetts on our way home. sort of the philosophical or scholarly questions that we are posing with this talk is it possible that these traumas are genetically encoded into our DNA, and are modern neo-pagans drawn to their respective traditions in order to heal these wounds, as well as the broader disconnection of modernity?
And the wounds specifically that we're talking about are the persecution that pagans experienced at the hands of first the Romanization of the Celtic islands, and then the Christianization. So epigenetics, just to give a brief drop on that, it's a fairly hotly talked about field. I'm not a scientist, but I am interested in it to the degree that it, as a psychologist, that it speaks to our relationship to our ancestors. So epigenetics is this idea that there are genetic effects that are not encoded in our DNA sequence, but that are enacted upon our cellular and physiological, and in some cases psychological traits that result from external or environmental factors when we are in utero. So these alterations may or may not be hereditable. Current research is saying that they are inherited. And recent research suggests that we inherit much more than just physical characteristics from our ancestors. We inherit their trauma and their gifts as well. This in turn affects how we feel about ourselves, how we perceive the world, and it informs our very ability to heal, learn, and grow as individuals. One of my favorite stories or examples of this is that the egg that became you was present in your mother's uterus when your mother was in your grandmother's uterus growing. So that's at least 3 generations, and the idea is that then what your grandmother felt and experienced, her happiness or her devastation, was epigenetically cued into the being that became you. I would offer that this is what indigenous wisdom has been saying for thousands of years, the 7 generations theory that comes out of the Native American tradition. I would offer then that it's not just your grandmother or your great-grandmother, that this can go back generations upon generations depending on how that epigenetic inheritance is dealt with by you and carried. So from that, I feel that as modern pagans who are seeking to remember and refashion our Celtic pagan lineages, we are going to have to deal with and face and address this inherited trauma that our ancestors experienced when their traditions were destroyed, essentially, when it was burned or stoned or hung, or all the different lovely stories from the witch trials that were set out to essentially erase this history. But all is not lost. In Mark Wolyn's book that came out this year, It Didn't Start With You, How Inherited Family Trauma Shapes Who We Are and How to End the Cycle, he says, we need sentences, rituals, practices, and exercises to help us forge a new inner image. The new image can fill us with a reservoir of calm, becoming an internal reference point of peace that we can return to again and again, with new thoughts, new feelings, new sensations, and a new brain map ingrained. We begin to establish an inner experience of well-being that starts to compete with our old trauma reactions and their power to lead us astray. So this is, what we're dealing with. One of our mentors, Orion Foxwood, who's a pagan elder, calls it post-traumatic inquisitional syndrome. Sort of similar to Degree's post-traumatic slave syndrome, we carry the PTSD in our epigenetic memory of what our ancestors suffered. And so we have to do the work. We have to be willing to show up and to do that work. But part of that is done by changing the story, by reimagining. Norman Doidge in The Brain That Changes Itself says, we can change our brains simply by imagining. What we imagine, we make possible. So I would offer that we can use these access points of sacred space, of ancient monolith, to access our deep memory. Our inner eye is stimulated, and often we find ourselves seeing ourselves, our lives, and our history then through new eyes. Our visions may come of the old ways, and the subtle memories become triggered by placing our bodies in the air, land, and sea of our ancestors. By internalizing these images then, and creating ritualized action in these spaces, we give our imagination ample content for recontextualizing the pagan ethos, a priori to the days of persecution. So yes, we need to move through and work with the traumatic memories that we have stored, but we do it with the intention of moving farther back into the recess of our blood and bones to find the hidden power of these places and their original use. So that's sort of what we were, that's what we were at, that's what we were doing when we were in the UK. And I would also offer, just as a little aside, that that although we traveled to Albion to do this, one of the things that I've been getting loud and clear having returned these past 2 months is that we don't need to go all the way there to necessarily stimulate or activate that memory. That nature is nature is nature, and although the ancestors under the land, under the ground here may not be our genetic inheritance, the elementals, the rock, the water, the fire, all fire knows what every fire has ever known since the beginning of fire.
Yes.
All water knows what water has known since the beginning of water. And as we are learning more and more about the root systems of trees, trees communicate in the most brilliant and magical of ways, sending their information before they're about to die down into the root systems to be uploaded up into the other trees. And this isn't just Megan making stuff up. This is or sort of, you know, I intuited this from a tree that I talked to, which I talk to trees. But no, this is actually coming out of the research into groves and forests, and specifically, where is his awesome name? There's this great book that just came out. I'll find it in a second here. About, here we go. It's by German forester Peter Wollenben. The Hidden Life of Trees, What They Feel and How They Communicate. Good read. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about these specific sites that we went to and what we encountered there. And just, I invite you to just notice, as you're looking at these images and hearing these stories, if one of these sites kind of like, ooh, I feel something there, there's some juice, there's something there, and just make a note of that.
I just wanted to point out really quickly, this is the Glastonbury tour, which we're going to come back to. And I think you can kind of see it. It's actually my favorite part of this picture is the guy in the center is looking at his cell phone. Juxtaposition.
But still radiating with the Shekinah glory. Okay, so one of the first places we attuned to on this pilgrimage was an ancient cave beneath, remember the picture with us walking up the hill with Roz and her straw hat? It was a cave underneath the ruins of this Welsh castle.
12th century.
But the cave was not from the 12th century. The cave was 30,000 years old. Probably older than that, but the remains that they found in it were 30,000 years old.
And adorned and dyed in ochre, red ochre.
And adorned with burial objects. So there was
female.
A female shaman, leader, priestess is believed. So they've named the cave Caradwin's Cave. And in it you can see in the picture there, that little black area is a well, a sacred well that comes out of the rock right there. And that water in the gourd is from that well. So if you didn't get a chance to anoint yourself with it, don't drink it, but splash it around. To enter a cave is to return to the goddess's womb. Pilgrims who crawl through a rocky underground tunnel representing the birth canal are regarded as born again from the yoni of the goddess. When Earth was known as Mother, journeys into her depths were sacred passages, the dark mother of all life. The remains of large, round earthen mounds built from 4500 BCE onwards are found in great numbers in Brittany, Ireland, Wales, Scotland, and England. They too are shaped like the pregnant mother's womb. A narrow vaginal passageway leads to usually one and sometimes several small, dark, womb-like chambers. Although these mounds contain some human remains and are called burial chambers, they are much more than this, representing the swollen, pregnant belly of the mother to which we return when we die and from which we will all hopefully be once more reborn. They were places of magic and meaning where the ancestors were honored and contacted. That's from Spinning the Wheel of Anna, a spiritual quest to find the British primal ancestors by Kathy Jones. So this hallway that you see here was just the beginning of the entrance, which did very much become like a vaginal canal. We were underground, it was steep, it was slippery, it was dark, it was small. And we crawled down probably 100 feet or more into the side of the mound of the hill and entered into this cave-like room, which was only big enough for, I think, maybe 6 or 8 of us. And we crawled down by candlelight.
And we have our beloved teacher, Orion Foxwood, with us, who has severe hip dysplasia.
Who's on both crutches. Who had Indigo, were you in front or behind
I was
him?
behind him.
Indigo behind him and another big guy in front of him, like basically navigating him down these steps.
His knights.
Yeah, getting him over, and and at points Indigo's like crawling down. So we literally are going into, and the air and the energy is getting closer and thicker and darker and more intense, and I'm starting to have a little bit of like anxiety, like whoa, where are we going? And so I start toning. Oh, and the chamber starts resonating with this tone, and all of us by candlelight are toning as we go into the chamber. We get into the very center of the chamber, and Roz has us blow out all the lights. And we sit in complete darkness. I've never been in such darkness. Darkness to the point where you start hallucinating, you start seeing things. I started seeing like fractal patterns start opening in front of my eyes. I started seeing blue glowing around the people around me. The auras, the fairy energy, and in the cave, in this little area is another cave within a cave. It's this tiny little area where the bones of the priestess had been. And I guess, we didn't do this, but if you crawl down through that cave, you can crawl through the entire mountain and come out at the other side where there's a river. It's the mouth of a river, the headwaters of this river in Wales. This is a very potent, very powerful initiatory experience at the very beginning of our trip in Wales. I literally can say I came out of that cave and I felt like a completely different person. My intuitive eye was wide open, and there was a way in which that process was, I think, transformative for many of us. Anything you want to add?
Well, I believe we also sang the Earth Mother song down there as we entered her body and sung to her stones. That was powerful, and the resonance, certainly reflecting on the myth of Caradwyn, which is too involved to get into in this talk, but you can find stories of it online, I'm sure. It's about transformation, often through death and rebirth. And it was a powerful way to start the trip as well.
So we moved on to a grove, a sacred grove of yew trees. And these trees in Wales were over 700 years old. They're currently at the site of a 6th century church and graveyard, but were there, and the site itself was a pagan site long before the church came along and built its structures there.
Which was a common thing that they did.
It's a common thing. So trees hold and share memories in their root systems, like I just said, and they communicate what is underground. In Celtic folklore, graveyard trees hold the wisdom of the ancestors buried there. So you've got the wisdom of the trees, and then you have all the wisdom of the bones and the tissue and everything of the ancestors that are in the graveyard, and they're all kind of connected back and forth and talking to each other. It's not really clear which came first, but the yews or the churches. But yews and churches are always connected. This is from another source online. Our guide there told us that the yews came first, and that they were there are pagan stories that said that the yews are said to mark the sites that were sacred to the earth goddess. Yews, actually, interestingly enough, they're evergreens. They grow very slowly, and they're said to symbolize rebirth. They've been linked to the world tree, and they are avenues for connecting to the upper and the lower worlds. They're specifically associated with the underworld. What I found fascinating was that they smell, and the bark and the leaves look like redwood trees. My theory is that they're sort of the redwoods, I said this earlier, of Great Britain, and there's probably a connecting link between the ancient redwoods we have here and the redwoods they have there.
I meant to look up the genealogy. I'm going to do that on my thing.
Okay, so what you have here are the bleeding yews. Not all yews bleed, but in this churchyard there are about 9 yews, and 3 of them were bleeding. One of them bleeds all the time, and it's not sap. Like when we touched it and we smelled it, it's just like menstrual blood. It smells like iron, smells like menstrual blood smells. It's wet, and the way in which it kind of oozes out of the tree, you can see in sort of the bottom corner there, the tree where there was the bleeding yew was coming just out of the inside of the tree, not up there because it had been cut. It shows better up there because it's been cut, but it's actually not due to the tree being cut. It's just sort of oozing out of this very yonic shaped crevice in the tree. So these trees were very holy and very very numinous. I mean, I had a very transformative experience touching the tree and feeling like there was this, like there was no differentiation between my hands, my body, and the tree when I encountered it. Anything you want to add about the bleeding yews?
We anointed things with
Yeah.
we brought things, and we had stones that we were all supposed to work with, and a lot of us were inspired with the stones from something else that we all did together to anoint the blood on it, and I still have those, and people picked whatever cloths or whatever they wanted to.
Yeah, we
So
anointed ourselves, and
we
we were
anointed
kind
them
of
as
going.
the bloods from the trees.
Yeah, it's similar to the kumkum used in Indian ritual. We were kind of just putting it all
We
over
put it on
ourselves.
our third eyes and
Yeah,
everything.
and I thank you for bringing that up, Dionisio. We were given, before we left the airport in the U.S., we were given rocks from the land of the guides that took us on this trip. We were taken on this pilgrimage by 2 Druid guides and our mentor, Orion Foxwood, who's a fairy seer. And the Druid guides have land in Vermont that they live on, and they gave us rocks from the river there that we took and carried with us. We put them on other rocks, and they were just sort of our pilgrimage stones. And a number of us, mine is reddish brown now because I smeared it in the ochre of the yew tree. All right.
All right, so this is a pretty classic example of a smaller dolmen or burial mound. We actually visited an almost identical dolmen in Ireland in 2012. And it's believed that these were places of burial. There were remains found in this one and many of the other ones. It's also believed that they may have been at one time covered entirely with earth, so making more of like a cave or a chamber like some of the other ones we visited. And assuming that these stones weren't levitated into place, the diagram that I found, basically it started with excavating a pit and then rolling the massive stones up the slope of the pit on logs, and then kind of tipping it in, so get them down in there, and then you drag the top stone up and muscle it onto the top of the thing. And it may have stayed like that for hundreds or thousands of years. We don't know who excavated it. There's even a theory that Stonehenge might have been buried at one time as well, because that's what Newgrange is. Newgrange is a massive mound complex like this in Ireland. Another theory, you can kind of see it here. This is a central stone that is not weight-bearing. So the theory is that this stone may have been hoisted into place to seal off or close the tomb when it was no longer going to be used.
So these dolmens are found all over the world, including the U.S. We have them in upstate New York and the East Coast and in the Midwest. They're about 3,500 years old. They're from 3,500 BC, which is 1,000 years before Stonehenge was built. So the dolmens and then the barrows that we'll see, those are some of the oldest constructions of the Neolithic period. And then the megaliths, which are the Stonehenge and the stone circles, those come a little bit later. The lore around this dolmen is that it's an access point for fairy work, and that gnome entities have been seen hanging out around the Pentra-Ifan. This is also, you can sort of see it in the background, it's on the top of this beautiful hill in Wales, and it looks out all over the the western seaboard of Wales. So you can kind of sit up there and look out and see this beautiful vista from the dolmen. And you'll see a picture later on where we're gathered under it singing. We did a lot of singing here, the Earth Mother song. This is actually where she taught us that song. All right, moving on. This is now down in Cornwall. So we traveled from Wales down to Cornwall. And our guide here, Pagan Jenkins, is he is a prehistoric researcher, kind of an expert on the Cornish area in particular. And he took us here to Land's End. This is the very, very tip of Cornwall. It's where the Michael line is said to originate, which is a ley line that it comes ashore here. So I think it originates further out in the Atlantic, but it comes ashore here. And the interesting things about these cliffs were they were filled, there's granite rock on top, but underneath it's entirely quartz crystals. So you are standing on these powerful activating rocks, and the simulacra are natural forms such as rocks that look like beings, and you can kind of see the one here on the left how he's kind of got like a face and a nose. It looks a little bit like the Easter Island guys, and then the one on the right there, from that it's sort of like a head and a body, but you know, if you look at these and you spend time watching them, they definitely have these sort of like giant megalith sort of personalities. And
so certainly where Tolkien was probably got the inspiration for the stone giants.
Right.
Yeah.
Are you able to make that wider so that the laying down giant, you can, are you able?
Yeah, I've got some other pictures on my phone I can
You can
Okay.
show later
But
on, yeah.
It really looks like his head, which is at the top, and he has a hand and he's picking his nose, and Ryan pointed that out, and I pointed out he's got an erection.
That's thank you, Denise.
No,
So
it's
that's
over
actually
in the other one.
okay. Yeah,
That one
you
you
can
can
see
see,
in
but
here.
up there, it really
There's-
looks like an arm.
There's his
You
face.
can really see a hand with a
It's
thing,
reclining.
where there's a rock laying across that goes right to what looks like a nose. And it's really a nose there, and it's
So there's
really
simulacra
kind
with
of
a
fun. Picking
personality.
his nose with the erection up there, and
Yeah,
we
yeah.
really enjoyed that.
You know, the best of both worlds. What was also present on these on the cliffs here were ancient cairns, or the remains of ancient cairns and initiation chambers. Pagan said that, so this outcropping that we were on, he said, was sort of the main gathering place that the Neolithic people would come, and they have found all sorts of artifacts showing that they would gather here and do rituals on these cliffs. And then just further down, I think the next outcropping that you see in the distance there was for the inner sanctum secret mysteries, and there were initiation chambers and different rituals that took place on those. And this is partly from his prehistoric research, and it's partly from the lore that's around these cliffs. What I can share with you is the day that we were there, you can see it was very foggy, very misty, and we went out onto the rocks, which are just like sheer cliffs down, and a number of us began to do some of the fairy seership practices that we're trained in, some of the breathing, and we began to tone and sing like we'd been doing the whole time, and all of a sudden the mist just, and it was perfectly sunny and clear. You could see as far as, you know, as out to sea as you could see. And then when we got done and closed the energies down, the mists came back in. So that was an interesting bit of weather witching. We kind of got the best of both worlds, because through the mists, what you began to get a sense of, and you know, this is an academic lecture, but I will out myself. I saw visions. You know, I was standing on the edge, I'm looking out into the mists, and I see these ancient villages or these ancient towers out in the water there. And I'm thinking, what the heck is that? Because I didn't know about the mythology. But when we got back and I talked to Pagan about it, he said, oh, well, there's legend that there's the sunken land of Lyonesse and the sunken land of East that's out there that used to be part of connected to the continent here. So very powerful experiences, and the idea was that a lot of the people came ashore here or came into these places, and because of their power, we have used them for ritual for thousands of years. And I think that there's still modern pagans that go back and do rituals in these places. We certainly did when we were out there.
So this was really quite fascinating. This is an ancient village called Cairn Uni, which is actually a name taken from a local parish or church. We have no idea what the natives may have called this, but it's one of the best preserved Neolithic villages in the entire world. So on the left here you can see the aerial view of the entire complex, and these stone foundations would come up to about waist high, and then there would be thatched, domed kind of huts built over that, and would probably house anywhere from 10 to 20 people in each one of these. These little side areas, we believe, are where the livestock would have lived, because the ancient peoples slept with their livestock in their huts, not only to help the animals keep warm, but also because the animals generate heat and help keep the hut warm. So very different, much smellier times than we live in now. What was really, really fascinating about this place, I think it's right here, is there's an underground chamber in the middle of the village, and the entrance is actually right over here. We don't know why this one is the only one that had a window. Maybe he was handing out the entheogens as
There you
people
go, that's,
walk by.
there's the stairwell. You're in front of the stairwell.
Yeah, so this is the entrance, and this is kind of looking back from inside the chamber out through the entrance. We went down there and did some toning and some singing as well, and it was powerful. And what I really tried to do was put myself into the shoes of these ancient peoples, try and figure out, or just feel a little bit of how they lived and what their daily life was like.
This village in particular was active from the 5th century BCE until the 4th century AD, the end of the Roman occupation. And the underground chamber that he's talking about is called a fogu. And they don't really know what they were used for, but we encountered the groundskeeper slash owner of the private part of Carnuni. Carnuni is owned part by the Historical Society, and it's also part privately owned. And the owner there is a druid, and bought the site to preserve as much of it as possible. And he said that the initiation chamber was used for, and is continued to be used for initiations, or the fogu was used and continued to be used for initiations. He also took us onto his property there and showed us an ancient stone circle that was built much smaller scale with bench-like seating around a fire pit.
Bench and then stones, about 8 of them.
There was a holy well on the property and a hawthorn tree that was 1,000 years old. So it's a very active, very activated spot out in the middle of Cornwall.
That man came to own that property through a very powerful synchronicity as well.
Yeah, kind of like divine intervention. Oh, I was going to point out that little picture down there in the right-hand corner. You can't see it really well, but there's the green on there is green moss that was fluorescent.
Yes.
So when you went in there and you shined your light on it, it was the craziest, most amazing fluorescent.
Yes,
It was like the green mist. You hear about the
Right.
green mist in a lot of fairy lore. And I'm bet you dollars to donuts that's connected to the green mist, because it was just it was really powerful looking. Did anybody rub it on themselves to see if it made us fluorescent? I think we were all like, oh, it might be a little toxic. So we didn't experiment with that. Anything else? Oh, I will say here that all of us were able, there's 21 of us on pilgrimage, all of us were able to get inside there. We turned off the lights, made it as dark as possible, toned the heck out of that place, and many of us went into trance, and channels began to come through. Our fairy seer mentor Orion, his spirit wife Bree, spoke to us and gave us some really amazing information and just encouragement about what we were doing and why we were doing it on the trip. Right.
So this one is actually one of the sites that I connected most to on the trip. Again, everyone's heard of Stonehenge. Fewer people have heard of Avebury, which is this complex here. It's about 25 miles southeast of Stonehenge. And it's believed that Stonehenge was a burial place and initiation place, like many of the other dolmens and burial sites that we found and showed you one of, and that this was the college as well as the place for the massive festivals on the summer and winter solstice. So this is what Avebury is, a reconstruction of what we think Avebury originally looked like. That's a mile in diameter. There's a town in the center of that circle now, with a pub. There's a great henge there, which is, it's about 15, 20 feet deep now, and they believe that it would have been twice as high and twice as deep because erosion over the centuries and millennia would have washed that dirt down and kind of filled it up. So at its height, this may have been an embankment of 20 or 25 feet that you would have entered from one of these 4 pathways in the 4 corners. There are 2 circles in the center, as you can see. My theory is that they may have represented god and goddess, they may have represented sun and moon, quite possibly both. One of the circles in the very center here, I apologize for not having a laser pointer, single obelisk in the center of the inner circle, so obviously very phallic. The other one has a cove of 3 stones, that's the technical term for it, that's aligned to the midwinter sunrise, and there's another stone that is set off a distance, but still with the alignment, so that on that midwinter sunrise, the shadow of that single phallic stone, not this one, the one over here, would grow and basically enter that opening of the 3 cove stones that are aligned towards the sunrise. So, yeah, very, very interesting. Sacred sexuality, embodied ritual. I have another theory that this is the great circus. Some of these stones are still there. This avenue leading into Avebury. William Stukeley is the name of the gentleman that actually preserved the site and stopped the church from knocking over and destroying the stones one by one every year as a Christmas celebration. These stones are massive, 40 tons. I'm talking like, 10, 15, 20 feet high. No idea how they moved these. Well, I have some ideas how they moved using force. Anyway, when Stukeley drew this drawing, these avenues were only a theory. They've since been verified by archaeological evidence, as well as this stone circle, which is called the sanctuary, and is no longer there. All the stones have been removed. So my theory is that we would have processed down and entered through the tail of the serpent, all carrying the torches, thousands of us, process all the way up through the avenue, come into the grand concourse here, maybe done a ritual for the moon here, a ritual for the sun here, and then exit out through the other concourse, and maybe this was where the rest and relaxation was happening, maybe this was where the erotic orgies were happening, we don't know. But I have this vision in my mind of you being able to stand off on the hillside from this perspective and see this whole thing lit up like a serpent. You get kind of this effect at Burning Man too. I think that's why a lot of us keep going back there. But again, everybody, who was anybody, would have been down here participating in the ritual. So who were we making the giant fire serpent 3-mile-long shape for? Who was going to see it? The gods?
Can you point out Silbury Hill and West Kennett Long Barrow?
Yes, thank you, honey.
There's Silbury Hill and West Kennett Long Barrow. We'll talk about that in a second.
This is West Kennett Long Barrow right here. Ancient burial chamber.
Yeah, we're going to have that next.
Massive complex. This is Silbury Hill. This is another very interesting complex that we're not really going to talk about too much, but it's a 300-foot tall mound. It's as tall as the Great Pyramids. It's shaped like a pyramid. It's called the Pyramid of Britain, and it's not just an earthen mound. It's actually underneath the dirt are giant blocks of quarried chalk, which is the substrate layer that covers most of this region of Britain.
And it is not a burial mound.
It's not a burial mound. They don't know what it was for. All they know is that it's approximately the same size and shape of the Great Pyramids and built at the same time.
There's a fairly long history of paranormal activity associated with Silbury Hill, and more recently, alien theory.
There's a lot there.
There's a lot.
A lot more than we can talk about today.
Okay. And then the next slide, it was just the overview.
Right, so this is Avebury today. As you can see, there's an entire town built within the stone circle. Most of the stones have been unfortunately knocked down. What they would do is they would excavate a giant pit. The church would excavate a giant pit underneath one of these massive stones, get a raging bonfire going, and then having already kind of chipped away at the dirt foundations, they'd get that raging fire going. Once it died down to the cold, they would pull this stone down on top of this bonfire pit and wait for it to get red hot from all the heat underneath it that's trapped, and then they would splash water on it, and it would crack and break, and then they would go at it with the primitive stone, or not, it was bronze tools by this time period. This is happening like the 12 to 1600s.
So what you can see in the other picture here is you've got the large stone, and then right next to it is a little obelisk, and those are placed all around Avebury, showing where stones had been.
So William Stukeley spent a majority of his personal fortune to purchase this land and preserve it in the early 1700s. And this is a later development that was built to try and relocate people from here to there. A number of other buildings that were within the circle were knocked down, but as you can see, there's still some farmhouses, there's a couple gift shops, there's an inn with a pub. They advertise that it's the only pub within a stone circle in the entire world, which is technically true, but it's not really a stone circle anymore, unfortunately. Another interesting thing in the guidebook is that the giant diamond-shaped stones always alternate with each other, across from each other in the avenues. And the theory is that the diamond-shaped ones represent the feminine, the phallic or obelisk type ones, the masculine.
Did you know about the Druid College thing?
Yes, so there was, this was the site of the great Druid College that would host the big festivals on the summer and winter solstices, and I got the delicious shivers because I was a Druid in a past life in England, or Albion I should say, and I'm a Druid again in this life. The serpent tattoos that I have, somewhat similar to the serpent shape of Avebury, and I just had this feeling that I would have ended up there at some point to learn, to initiate, to participate in the festival. I got a lot more from Avebury than I did from Stonehenge, because you can't touch the stones at Stonehenge anymore.
Yeah, we didn't really include Stonehenge in this presentation because it's like an industrial complex right now. You can't get close to the stones, there's tons of people, it's not a very active site energetically. So we focused on the places that you could actually go and touch and that were maybe a little more off the beaten path, but had a little more juju.
And this is off the beaten path. This is not, it's a destination, but not nearly to the degree that Stonehenge is.
Yeah. So, West Kennet Long Barrow, this was my favorite spot. This West Kennet Long Barrow is a long barrow. It's a long mound built about 5,500 years ago. It was a burial chamber, but not only a burial chamber. It was used for rituals, and many of the chambers have now collapsed. They were made with stone and also wood, and the wood kind of rotted away, and they've fallen in and collapsed. But back when they were excavating it, they found rows and rows of bones and skulls.
Rows of skulls, like catacombs.
Yeah. So it
Hundreds.
was. I don't know if there were hundreds in there, but they did find rows. They said there were at least 50 skeletons that they had excavated from there. But it wasn't. That wasn't the only use. It was used for initiation and for my sense was that this was a place that was used for earth like chthonic underworld mystery. These big stones here were, I think they were originally placed to close off the front of it, but the entrance you can see was right in here, which is where these stones are, and you kind of came around the stones
That's the side view.
and entered into here back, and then went into the entrance in there, and it's the stone. The inside of it was 1, 2, 3, 4. I think there were 5 chambers that were open. There were these mini antechambers on the side, and then a chamber in the middle where about 10, 15 of us fit. And evidence that it's still being used to this day for ritual. There were candles, there were offerings, there were things that had been left in there. And one of the things that we did in the Long Barrow here, and this was at the very end of our trip now, in the Avebury, Glastonbury area, was we did a healing ritual for our teacher who has the hip dysplasia, but we had some very powerful trance-like connections because of the ancestral energy there, because that it's a a place for underworld connection. One of the key teachings around fairy lore and fairy seership is that the fae, they are connected to the ancestors. They're connected to the underworld. They're connected to the dead. And so when you go into this place, we went in with specific chants that we were doing that called up the fairy energy. It came up very strong. The experience that people had in there was eerie in a good way, and also eerie in a kind of creepy way. Some of us like that more than others. I'm like, bring it on! But certainly what the memory that came to me in this place was of being a priestess for the underworld, for doing the death rites, doing the work with the beings that live in the hollow hills, which are the fairy people, and working really closely with that. In our fairy seership lineage, I should say, there aren't fairies just in the underworld. There are also upperworld fae as well, which are more like angelic beings, but we have both worlds that we work in, and my connection in this place in particular was much more with the underworld.
I want to know what they did with the skulls and the skeletons that they excavated.
I think they took them out. Well, you know, one of the things that I read was one of the guys that was excavating this, I think this was in like the 50s or 60s. Oh, it might have been older than that. Anyway, one of the guys that was excavating and found some of the bones took them out and was using them in like medicines.
Oh yeah. Grinding them up and putting them in
grinding
snake
them up
oil.
and putting them up and other stuff, and I don't know where the rest of them ended up. They're probably in a museum, yeah. But they weren't in there when we were in there. But there was evidence that it had been recently used for ritual, other than just the rituals we were doing.
All of these sites are either managed by the English Heritage Foundation, which is the one that wants to set up a kiosk and charge you ticket prices, or the National Heritage, which is the one that wants to preserve the site and leave it free and open to the public.
Okay, so we're gonna move on.
So, Glastonbury tour. One of my favorite places, our favorite places in the whole world. The tower is the remains of a 12th century church that was built after the previous 6th century church fell down during an earthquake. Luckily that doesn't happen in England very often. But before that, it's believed that there was a stone circle ringing this top of this hill. And the really special thing about this place is basically that in ancient times, before earthworks and dams that were built by the Romans, this entire flatland around here would have flooded and become marshland during the summer, and would have been navigatable only by boat. So essentially, this is where the mythology of the island of Avalon comes from. You're looking at it. This whole area would have been, you know, submerged under 3 to 5 feet of water during about half the year during the winter time. The River Severn, which separates Cornwall from Wales, would have flooded inland. Creates very fertile soil. This is where they grow the apples. The county is called Somerset, and it's known for their cider, their hard cider, or scrumby. But essentially, the mythology says that you had to get to Avalon via ferry boat, and if you knew the correct incantations and the moon was right and the mists were just so, you would pass through the mists and arrive not at Glastonbury of the monks, but at the Isle of Avalon. Sort of phase shifted out of this world into the fairy world, where a day spent in Avalon meant a month in the default world, as we burners call it. You know, taking most of this from Marion Zimmer Bradley's Mists of Avalon, but a great many people in our communities consider that to be a very beautiful and well-researched work of historical fiction. And, you know, we don't know how much of it is fiction and how much of it is true. I was specifically referring to King Arthur. There's a whole lot more that we don't have time to get into there. But this is really a sacred landscape, and you can see in this diagram over here the labyrinthine path that would have been the ritual circuit up the Tor to the top, basically traces this labyrinth in 3 dimensions. There's a much more direct footpaths here and here, but on the high holy days, the summer and winter solstices in particular, local witches and druids, including our own Starhawk, who's a San Francisco priestess, Wiccan priestess, will lead the spiral procession up the Tor and do the ritual the old way. We also have a map here that I'll lay out on one of the tables, also drawn by our guide, Paul Jenkins, that not only shows where the floodplain would have been, but also shows how this particular point not only connects through ley lines and alignments to all the other sacred sites in Britain, but to all of these other sacred sites around the world. Things that ancients couldn't have known through any other means than divination or intuition. And this is a really cool map. We got this in 2012. I highly suggest taking a look at it.
I think the only thing I would add is that the lore around Glastonbury Tor is that it is another hollow hill.
Right.
That the god or the lord of the underworld or the Fae, Gawain up beneath, lives inside the hollow hill there, and that the entrance to the realm of Anwen or Awin is on the side of the hill where there is a Clutie tree. We'll talk about what a Clutie tree is in a second. But there's a tree there, and there's a big gigantic dragon stone, which in common lore is said to be Gwenapneith's testicle. And they say he's got one testicle in the upper world and another testicle in the other world, and he sort of straddles the two.
Also said to be a fossilized dragon egg.
And then you've got this phallic sort of tower on the top, and then you've got the very yonic,
shape of the hill.
Shape of the hill, so it's okay, so let's talk about the Clutie trees. Clutie trees are specifically associated with sacred holy wells. They are trees that have been used since the time of the dolmens. This tradition has been used in Celtic folklore, where you tie a rag to a tree. And what you do is you cleanse yourself with water of the sacred well, you say your prayer, and then you tie your wish to the Clutie tree. And the rag or fabric is an offering to the nature spirit and a remembrance of your wish or desire. And these trees are all over Great Britain and almost always associated with wells. So this is the Clutie tree in San Creed in Cornwall, where it's literally right over the well. And then in Glastonbury, you have the Gwenapneith tree, which has Cluties tied to it next to the dragon testicle, and then on the other side of the Glastonbury Tor is Chalice Well. What's special about Chalice Well is there are 2 kinds of water that flow out of the well. There's a white well where the water is it silica?
It's calcium.
Calcium, so it's got a whitish tint to it, and there's a red well that has iron in it, and the water actually has a red tint to it. And these 2 wells are considered to be very auspicious and sacred to the goddess, the red being her menstrual blood and the white being her ovum. And they have a long tradition of having healing properties. People make pilgrimage to the well. They've got a little pond in the site there where the red well spills out, and you can actually take your shoes off and bathe in the waters and drink the water. You don't want to drink too much of the iron water, or it'll give you the runs. But you have a little medicinal amount of iron water, and it's just there's a whole beautiful garden there around that's been built up around the well. That's a more cultivated well. There are other wells, like the Madrone Well in Cornwall, which has been all but abandoned. It's a ruin, and the well actually, when we went there, had run dry, and the Clutie tree was that's the San Creed tree. It looked very much like this, and it was just off to the side of the well. So we actually did a healing ritual while we were there at the Madrone well to call the waters back and to really bring into right balance the waters of the earth right now, and how much healing the waters of the earth need, and how waters represent the connection to the moon, the connection to the goddess, healing for women. So it was a really juicy, really powerful ritual that none of us planned. It just sort of, we showed up, the well was dry, this is what happened, and it ended up being a really powerful healing for a lot of the women in the group who were victims of domestic abuse and domestic violence, and we actually keened into the waters of the well and offered our tears into the waters to flow the water back, to flow that healing, nurturing energy back into the planet. It was a very solemn moment, probably one of the most solemn moments on the trip. So,
Just wanted to add a couple of quick things. I also read that with the Clutie tradition, some people also believe that you're releasing an ailment or something you want to let go of, and as the fabric degrades and breaks down, that is released from you. There's also a very strong tradition in Glastonbury, legend that says that Joseph of Arimathea traveled there after the crucifixion with Mary Magdalene, who was with child, and he went up onto this hill in Glastonbury and struck his staff into the ground, and the staff sprouted and became the wherein tree, which was another Clutie tree, just looked very similar to this. Was actually desecrated by Vandals about 5 years ago. Whether or not you believe the myth about the staff, they've done genetic tests on this tree, and it is a Middle Eastern cypress, a very specific species that doesn't grow in Britain. It's a thorn tree. And they've taken cuttings of it. There's another one that grows in the Glastonbury Abbey. And last thing, the only other place in the world where a red spring and a white spring come to the surface in the same place is
Stewart Mineral Springs up in Mount Shasta.
another sacred mountain.
No, there might be others, but these are the two that are known, where there are red and white springs. So in pause before a break, we're going to take a really quick break and set up for the ritual part. But right before we do that, we want to just honor Ivan McBeath, who was our druid guide on this tour. He is a native Briton, and he took us back to his homeland. We came home from this pilgrimage, and he really was the one that planned the whole pilgrimage and took us to all these magical places and introduced us to Pagan and Roz, who he had started a community with back in the 70s in the UK, the Oak Dragon Project. He passed away 10 days after we returned from pilgrimage. He was one of the foremost stone circle creators that held the sacred geometries of creating stone circles and as an initiated druid. And he came home back to Vermont to his property. He built one last circle on the property of a friend of ours, and the day after they initiated it, he passed away of a heart attack. And so we thought we wanted to just take a moment to remember Ivan and to send such gratitude and thanks for the gift that he gave us, spending the last few weeks of his life with us. And as a way to honor him, Ivan wrote this beautiful poem called I Am Merlin. And we've asked Jonathan, who was on the pilgrimage with us, to read this for you.
Everybody? Okay. Alright. I Am Merlin by Ivan Macbeth. I'm the spirit inside every single thing incarnate in this beautiful world. I am the sun in its height and the moon in the night. The planets are my children. They spin and weave the destiny of all things in the infinite spaces above and below. The tides are my moods. They affect all things in their flux and fall I am the past, the future, and the eternal present. You will find me in the silver vortex of the whirling wind, in the diamond flash of a falling star, in the proud stance of the sturdy stag, in the laughter shared among true friends, in the boughs of the mighty oak, in the sultry caresses of ecstatic lovers, and in the silence of eternity. The power of the universe flows through me, yet I am the servant of all. I am the sacred in all things. I am love. I bestow freedom. I see all things as beautiful. I bring people together in peace. I am the joy that flows to the surface of the truthful mind. I manifest through people who follow the native spiritual traditions of those magic lands collectively called Albion, and through the open hearts of those who can hear my whispering. Do you seek me? Does your soul thrill when you hear my call? When you find me, will you recognize me, love and honor me? Will you nurture and care for me, and make home for me inside your most vulnerable center? Do you have the persistence and ability to glean the secrets from my released spirit? Then finally, when all is said and done, will you rise to my challenge to empower yourself and midwife your magic? Midwife my magic for you, through your lips, your arms, and bodies, for the health of all beings and the sacredness of the Lamb. My mission is simple: to manifest the sacred here and now in this lifetime, so that prophecies are fulfilled. I dream a magnificent dream, all beings celebrate, all beings celebrating their birthright, all dreams coming true, all hearts beating to a single rhythm, unity and fulfillment, manifesting in abundance here upon the one earth. The God and the goddess, the king and the queen, heaven and earth join together in the eternal dance of creation. The clouds and cold, clinging mists roll back, revealing the summer lands, the ever-present paradise that is here for those eyes and hearts that can see. Finally, under the sun and our moon and our Mother Earth, we recognize each other as the brothers and sisters we lost so long ago. We embrace home once again in the arms of our family, and we celebrate the perfection in each other. The earth, nature, the goddess in all her moods, is my lover, child, mother, and muse. To her I have given my heart, and as she feels, so do I. Through all her changes, so do I transform, yet at the same time I facilitate her transformation. Joyfully, I make her happy, healthy, and beautiful for the coming of her Lord, the great spirit of the heavens, the great stag in the heat of the red, who unites with her, impregnating her with the joy of the present moment and the seeds of the future. The great Lord of the heavens is my friend, my teacher, my inspiration, my father and child. To him I have given my empowerment. As he creates and manifests, so do I. Through the inspirations that flow through him, so do I dream the dreams of the future. Like a caring friend, I help him don his fine raiment and escort him to his love. My goddess, in their union I find my joy, and I become my true self, the magical child, the wise one, the promise, and the hope of all beings. I am no one person. I am the sacred hawk, the spirit of Britain. A title that anyone may wear like a cloak, magnificent and multi-feathered. This cloak is a difficult one to bear, for in wearing it, I have abandoned myself to eternity. A chosen one whose destiny is to be ripped from conventional life and all that is familiar. But where, if you can, the spirit of our blessed land needs sons and daughters to sacrifice their all in service to the sacred dream. I am the dream inside all beings, waiting to be awoken into the conscious light of day. I am a magical adventure, waiting to be experienced and brought to life. Anyone can adventure with me, for the rules are simple. Recognize me for who I am, trust me, invite me into your heart, and take the first step. Enter into the unknown with me, and we will journey together along the serendipitous pathway of your unfolding. I will keep you safe and will whisper directions into your inner ear until you find the way home. Suddenly, you will realize that you have become me, sharing my dreams and my destiny, shaping the world in the image of the sacred wherever you go. So when you feel the time is upon you, put aside all meddlesome thoughts and relax into the peace of the gurgling brook, the beauty of the dragonfly with the crackling rainbow wings, the majesty of the hanging stones at sunset. Call my name softly, and I will come. Feel the sensations on your body as I approach. Welcome me into your heart. Whisper the words you need to utter in order to break the bonds of my sleep, my imprisonment in matter. Embrace my delicate spirit with gentleness. Treat me as your inner magical child. Care for me, love me as I grow and develop through the years. In time will come the glorious realization that I am you and you are me. Blessed be.
So we're going to take a quick break now just to orient the room so that we can do a ritual. We got started a little bit late, so we'll go a little bit past 9 if it's okay. And I just invite you to take your break a little more internally. Allow that powerful invocation, really, that calling forth of the divine child to sort of gestate inside of you. And we'll be back here in, say, 5 minutes.